We walked into that room naive. We walked into that room one version of ourselves, and all three of us walked out completely different versions of ourselves. We had been so many places together, my mom and my dad, as most kids are with their parents. You're everywhere. Your first bicycle ride, your first dance, your first cake, your wedding, your vacations, the good and the bad. And here we were as a family hearing the absolute worst. And so then you leave. We leave this office like, well, now what? Oh my God.
I have a second-time guest with us. I have Chris back with us. For those of you who have heard the prior episode, I do think you should listen to it because Chris opens up in a way that a lot of guests don't about the realities of the cancer diagnosis. And I'm hoping today that we can go from the diagnosis process into the treatment process. And Chris can share some of his views of being a son and a caregiver for someone going through treatment. Chris, welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be back.
Chris, before we get started, before we recorded, you were telling me how someone who heard this episode reached out to you. Can you give us a quick summary of what that was and, more importantly, how that made you feel?
Yeah, I about a week or so after the podcast aired, someone reached out whose parent has glioblastoma, and she's dealing with caregiving and treatment, and had questions, some questions that maybe I'll be able to answer today in this podcast. And it felt great to be able to offer some support and advice live. And I love the podcast because I would imagine there could be thousands of people listening to this podcast. And in a way, it's one-way communication. I mean, I'm just throwing my voice and my words out there, and I hope that it lands in some good places for people who need to hear it. And so to be able to have some of that come back and say how meaningful it was for them to take that in and to listen, I mean, that's what this is about. That's why I'm here, and that's great.
And that's why we do this. So I appreciate you joining us again. Before we get started, Chris, I should have told you, I've just had a GBM week. This has been a week of GBM. I think I've had six conversations. I met 3 people this week whose parents or aunts have gotten diagnosed with GBM. 3 in a week. That's kind of not my average week, I guess. And then on the other side, I met Jason, who I think you connected us to, and I met an entrepreneur who is working on a treatment plan for GBM. So I've seen sort of both sides of the house a little bit this week. Mm-hmm. The scare of the diagnosis, someone in treatment, and then where the industry is moving. So I'm sitting in this like very mixed feeling today of being devastated and then being hopeful. And that's at least emotionally where I'm sitting. And maybe you can talk to us a bit about that. Because I know you've probably been in both places.
That's the place I sit every day in hearing from caregivers, family, friends, loved ones. And then that intersection comes in between organizations, nonprofits, academic institutions. And then that third leg of the stool is really the biotech companies and the entrepreneurs who are fighting and developing life-saving therapies and drugs and treatments, and all to improve outcomes. And my mission since losing my dad is, how do we have all of these people together? How do we bring what they're doing to light? Biotech companies need funding. Okay, well, where do they go to get that funding, right? But they're companies. They're companies that most of us think, well, if we want to support something, we should support a nonprofit, which absolutely there's wonderful nonprofits to support. But we have to be careful and look at those nonprofits and figure out, well, are they indeed trying to do the things I want them to do, right? Some people may want them to provide resources and support and caregiving resources or second opinions or clinical trials. And some may be interested in research. Research is not the same as translational medicine or translational therapies. They're different, and we sometimes forget there is a difference. At least the layman, like I was coming into this, figured, well, if you're researching glioblastoma, what's up? Are we going to fix it? Are we going to solve it? Let's go. And in some cases, that's not the case. They're not going. That's not even their mission to cure a disease or solve a disease. It's to research to better understand the disease. Well, okay, well then where does that go from there? How do we get that to here? How do we, and then you have the patient there who's just like, I just want to save the life of the person I love or my friend or my mom or my spouse. So how do we get those things? So I can relate to those conversations because I have them every single day.
So on that note, let's maybe go back to where we left off in the previous episode. So I think we had just gotten to where you and your dad had a diagnosis.
Yeah, when we last spoke, we were in that room and the diagnosis hit us like a hammer. And then we left. And it's kind of crazy, when you go to a doctor's office, especially for a diagnosis. We walked into that room, naive. We walked into that room, one version of ourselves, and all three of us walked out completely different versions of ourselves. I think I may have said in that last episode that everything, we had been so many places together, my mom and my dad, as most kids are with their parents. You're everywhere. Your first bicycle ride, your first dance, your first cake, your wedding, your vacations, and the good and the bad. And here we were as a family hearing the absolute worst. And so then you leave. They let you leave. I know parents out there can probably relate to the feeling of when you have a child and you're in the hospital and then it's like the greatest day ever and it's amazing. It's a miracle. And then they're like, you're signing papers to leave. And they're like, okay, well, bye, take this human. And the feeling of all parents when you leave that hospital. I remember looking at my wife thinking like, we're allowed to leave with this baby? Like this is our baby. We're going to just leave. Oh my God. Right. And so anyway, not that that's similar to, but we leave this office. Like, well, now what? Oh my God. Now what do we do? Because we didn't get good news. We didn't get news. We got the action plan, the standard of care, which we covered. We got the game plan. Sort of, but none of it was positive. None of it, and we all look for that, right? All people look for, okay, well, what's the next thing? How are we going to get through these things? And the plan was vague. We didn't understand it fully because you're only in that office for however long, and you're also dealing with this traumatic information. It's strange that information could be traumatic, right? I mean, when you experience traumatic injury, it's physical and it's like damn, this is something that's happened to me. But when you take in traumatic information, I don't know, there's no playbook for that. You just walk out hearing the worst news of your life. And so we left that office with a plan of coming back to do a biopsy for his brain tumor. And in that discussion we had with the doctors, they said, you can't get this cut out. That was part of the discussion, was that the size and scale of this thing was too much. And the description I have since used is, yes, the tumor was about a 1 centimeter size tumor in his left frontal lobe. But the tumor, brain cancer, glioblastoma, this is how it works. It would be as if you took food coloring and drips of food coloring into a sponge, it just spreads, it infiltrates, and that's how they described his tumor. They said, yeah, the tumor is 1 centimeter, but if you look all around, as they were showing us the picture on the X-ray, if you look all around, that's also tumor. That's tumor spread, infiltration of his tumor, and so we were hoping they would just cut this thing out and move on, and that was not the case. They said it couldn't be.
Chris, can I go back to two things you said?
Mm-hmm.
You said, let me just make sure I heard you, and then let me ask you the question. You said we got a game plan, sort of, and then you went on to describe the game plan, but what I heard you describe was the next step. So in that moment, if you go back to that moment, did you really get a plan, or did you get the next step?
We got the next step. The next step is a biopsy and standard of care to treat the tumor. Now, I knew that they were not, I had this gut feeling that they weren't telling me everything. And I did not want to go and Google this immediately. And I asked the doc, I stepped out of the room with the surgeon. And I just said, could I ask you a couple of questions out in the hallway while mom and dad are sitting in the office? Now, my dad is falling asleep during this consultation. I mean, this is the worst possible news you can get in your life, I would imagine, that you have a terminal disease, and he's falling asleep. So he was not comprehending at all. And my mom was, I think, so overwhelmed with shock that she had nothing to say. And so I walked out in the hallway and I said to the doctor, what does this mean? Could you just be real and tell me, like, what are we looking at here can he survive this? And he said to me, and he was kind, he was a very kind guy. He just said, I'm going to do everything I can. We're going to do everything we can to get your dad as much time as we can. You know, if I can add 5 years on his life, great. We're going to do everything we can. That's basically what he said. Now, when I did eventually go and Google this, the stats are awful. And for those listening, that does not mean that your loved one is going to fall in those stats, because there are outliers, there are survivors in this disease. But knowing those stats are scary. Knowing that he could live for 6 to 12 months with this, that's not 5 years, like he told me. And I only learned that, probably by the time I got home, and I did start Googling this and thought, oh my God.
Chris, before you go into what you did at home, can we stay in the office for a second?
Yeah.
So you sort of see your mom kind of go into like shock, right? So she kind of has like shock, shut down kind of mode. Your dad's kind of not present per se in the kind of context of what's going on. I've heard you say that the news was devastating to you. So it sounds like of the 3 people in the room, you're the only one who's really sort of absorbing what's going on.
The radiation oncologist was saying how sorry she was. I'm fighting back tears. I'm fighting back my own tears, and I'm fighting back the tears I have for my dad. Because I'm scared. I'm afraid. I'm in full fear mode.
Yeah.
But I wasn't just given a terminal diagnosis. He was. And so I'm fighting back these mix of emotions and tears for me and for him. Because at that moment, I realized, at that moment, I knew this is my responsibility as a son to now do everything I can for both my mom and my dad. I have to. Everything. And everything means a lot of little things and maybe as many big things as possible. Because I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I need more information from all of you. Like, what about clinical trials? What about I'm coming up with all these questions in my head, and I'm not asking them, which many people do in this situation. They don't ask questions because they're in shock or they're not sure. Or they're not confident or comfortable to ask questions. These are the doctors. They're wearing the white coats and they know best.
Yeah.
Why would I question the doctor? And in time, I did learn that you have to question and you have to ask and you have to be pretty bold because you are your own advocate and you're your loved one's advocate. And in my dad's case, his lack of comprehension in this visit pretty clearly showed that he was not going to be able to do this for himself. I'm in that room more times than I want to admit, Samira, since then. I mean, I'm in that room all the time.
Yeah. Before we keep going, there's something that you've said that I'm sitting in, which is you're fighting back tears. The radiation oncologist is saying she's sorry. You step out of the room, the surgical oncologist, and the surgical oncologist,
The surgeon, the neurosurgeon.
Step out and you ask what survival looks like. And the answer you get, if I heard you right, was they would try everything possible and they would try to get to 5 years.
We'll do everything for your dad. We'll try to get him five more years. How does that sound?
Okay.
And I said, that sounds great.
So the reason I want to the reason you see me anchoring on this is I imagine that in that moment there's actually emotional dissonance because you have one doc who is saying she's sorry, you have another doc who is saying 5 years.
It's confusing. It's very confusing. There's so many emotions, and we're just one appointment. There's people in the waiting room. There's people in the waiting room that are going to come in next. I mean, it feels, and I don't want to say that there's any, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if there's a better way to do this or how to do it or in what way to do this. But here we are in a cold hospital visitation room being given the worst news possible by three, and it's a tiny room and they're all standing there in their white coats and there's some intimidation because I don't know. It's the same intimidation I get when I'm in a garage. So my car is getting worked on. I don't know what. So yeah, I don't. You tell me. I'm depending on you, and we depend on our doctors to perform miracles. I am expecting a miracle from this guy, and that is not what I should be expecting. They cannot perform miracles. They can't. They can only use the tools they have to treat the problem the best they can. And do they have the tools that they need? That's the larger question.
I agree. There's something. So I know this is appointment one, but just because you play with me on this, and I'm sorry, what you're willing to go into like depths here that I don't think a lot of patients can or want to. I do want to point out a few things that I'm hearing because I think you are capturing what happens at most appointments with most patients. Because what I'm now hearing, right, is you're almost crying. There is this like burden of responsibility that has been kind of all of a sudden been dropped on you. You have dissonance. You have this radiation oncologist who is saying she's sorry, and then you have another neurosurgeon who's saying 5 years. At this point in time, tell me if I'm wrong, but at this point in time, you don't really know what the actual outcomes look like.
We have no idea.
You don't really have a game plan because they've told you biopsies next, but they've sort of kind of maybe hinted at treatment, but not really. There's no real plan per se.
Right. It's the first step is we have to confirm our diagnosis. We have to confirm that with a biopsy.
Correct. So at this point in time, you've had a consult, you've been given information that is super loaded, traumatic, but you don't actually fully understand it yet. Correct?
Correct. And I don't remember at what point they said we're the administrative person is going to be preparing a book for you, a binder. I think they just said a binder. We've got a binder for you, and I'm like, fuck, do I need a binder for? So what do I need a binder for?
Oh
and now I'm thinking about when am I supposed to pick up this binder, and what is it? And like, this is 2021, and you want me to get a binder? I'm like, and I don't remember if it was that day that they mentioned it or one of the follow-ups, but I remember driving up to the hospital to pick up this binder and bring it. And by the way, nobody reads the binder. If we could just tell every hospital out there and every cancer center in the United States of America that, and again, my own perception, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm telling you, I don't think anybody is opening that binder. That's the terrible thing about these kinds of consultations with these of terminal cancer diagnosis, is that you just don't understand it, you don't know it, and you can't learn it all and know it in that 10 minutes, that 12, 15-minute visit, whatever it is. And they didn't rush us out or anything. I don't want to make it sound like they were bad people. That they didn't rush us out, but we sure didn't want to stay much longer. But I did not feel like we left fully understanding this. All we understood was, well, now the next step is a biopsy. And at that biopsy, that's when we're going to learn how bad this truly is. Because maybe he was saying it could be a lower glioma, I don't remember what a grade 2 glioma, or it could be worse. So now we're all hinging our bets on that information. And in retrospect, I don't think the biopsy was necessary. I really don't. And that was a hard process to go through, the biopsy.
Okay, before we go to the biopsy, why didn't you look at the binder?
Because I'm thinking about, we know we're going to do the standard of care. This is post biopsy now, but the binder was filled with information about it's too much information. It's so much information, and I'm not of the generation that's going to look something up in a binder. I'm going to go to my phone, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to type in, what do I do if my dad has a seizure? It's just not how I think we consume information anymore. And so it's just this big, heavy, bulky, like, thanks for giving me a bowling ball. What am I going to do with this right now?
What about your mom? Did the binder help your mom?
No, she didn't open it. She didn't want to open it.
Why?
My mom was scared, and my mom doesn't look of the future. I love my mother. She does not look towards the future, and she does not look towards the past. My mother lives in the present always. She hates looking back. She'll think of good times and talk about her parents, but she does not like to look back. She likes to look forward, but not too far forward. She likes to live in the present and look at tomorrow. What are we going to do to get to tomorrow? And that's how she handled a lot of the caregiving, was, how do we get through this right now? And I grieved. This information, this diagnosis, was grief. It was the first form of grief. And so we went from like diagnosis, all of a sudden for me, I went right to grief. And then I get to caregiving and grief together. So I'm experiencing this incredible amount of grief in that room. My mom, and prior to the room, before we got there, when we knew something was wrong, I'm grieving. My mom did not grieve physically or emotionally in that room. She took that information like, all right, well, now we know what we're going to do next. We're going to do the biopsy. And then after we get the biopsy, then we're going to do the treatment. Then we're going to do, she never looked ahead. And so, to fast forward, after my dad, when my dad did finally lose and this fight, and when he passed, she grieved. That's when she grieved. She didn't grieve at all during his experience, which was different than me, and a different. I'm the son experiencing parent. She's the spouse. Totally different.
Do I remember right that she went through her own stuff too before, though, right?
My mom's a 2-time breast cancer survivor, and my dad got her through that. My dad got her through the toughest days of her chemotherapy, her hair loss, her illness, how sick the chemo made her. And he was there for her as she would be for him.
Chris, the reason I was asking that is and this I can actually personally speak to. When you're going through treatment as a patient, you learn the skill to put on blinders, and your time horizon shrinks, and the shrinkage is visceral. It's visceral. I can't quite describe it other than that, and it shrinks to not just what do I need to do today, how do I live in the next 10 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that I imagine I'm obviously projecting here, but I imagine that for your mom, having gone through it twice, that ability to focus in completely on the now,
Mm-hmm.
maybe something that she picked up when she herself had gone through it.
Absolutely.
As a caregiver, I know my family did not have that. My husband did not. And their experience is closer to, I think, what you're describing, which is there's just there's a broader emotional capacity is not the right word, but there's like this almost like a funnel that's a little bit broader. And as a patient, that funnel becomes completely myopic.
Mm-hmm.
It just like it's like tunnel vision. It's like how do I get through 10 minutes?
Right.
And everything else falls aside. But as a caregiver, I imagine that that's not necessarily true if you yourself have not gone through something like that. And you're able to grapple with more, I imagine, both emotionally, cognitively, physically. There's more capacity.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. She faced her own mortality, not once, but twice. And that's the lens at which she's looking through now to care for him, just as he cared for her. It was different. It's a different diagnosis. It's a different game, and a different level of fear and emotions that happen with this one compared to how she dealt with it. But it's not any less. She was just, I can't imagine what she went through and what any cancer survivor goes through in facing this. It's like an imminent mortality, even though it may not happen, but as sure as all of a sudden it's right in your face.
Oh, yeah.
Like someone's holding a gun to you right now and they weren't a moment ago. And so I think her having faced that twice absolutely influenced her reaction and her demeanor throughout his illness.
Okay, so now going back, you had this conversation with the neurosurgeon, you go home, and that's when you start Googling things?
We get in the car and I could feel like the white knuckle driving. I was so afraid. My heart went racing from the moment we walked out of that room. And I remember very vividly, at this point, he was still walking okay, unassisted. He was having word finding difficulty. And that was beginning to get worse. And he would slur his words, and the word finding was an issue. So, like most people do, we get in the car and we try to digest and debrief a little bit of what just happened without trying to be too afraid. And I don't want to scare him, but the ride home was okay. We now know what we're going to do. We're going to get a biopsy, Dad. We've got it scheduled, and they're going to go in and make a cut. And they're going to go in there and they're going to take a little piece of this out of your brain. And he's not saying much. He's not showing much emotion like, oh my God, I'm so nervous. He's just he's just, it wasn't, and my mom didn't say much on the way home. And so, yeah, then you get home and we've got to figure out, or what, I guess we just sit around. What do we do now? Do you want to watch a movie? Like, what, you can't do anything. It's like you can't do, that's the helpless feeling that I really struggled with throughout the entire illness is I wish I could do something here. And there's really nothing I can do to fix you or help you besides figure out who can fix and help you. And so when we got on the way home, I remember thinking I had a lot of things in my head. One of the things I thought of was my own work, my line of work, which is philanthropy. I've worked in philanthropy for 18 years. At that time, maybe I'd been in philanthropy for 15 years, 3 years ago. And I remember thinking, boy, I've raised a lot of money, millions of dollars for various causes. I know that I have counterparts and peers doing the same thing. Why is it that we just got a terminal diagnosis? Where's all that money going? How can that be? I'm sure it's not for lack of trying, but something, it didn't add up. And that fleeting memory of that thought has stayed with me is, well, what are we doing? What are we doing here and why are we in that place? But more immediate is I get them home and then I remember heading back to my house. I'm sitting right here at this desk and I opened up my computer and I created a Google sheet like I do when I try to keep track of stuff. And I start writing down institutions for second opinions. I start Googling and researching clinical trials. What does he qualify for? I go to clinicaltrial.gov and realize I needed another degree to even understand what I'm reading here. It was a race. It was like this. It felt like it was a race, and the race started that moment.
Chris, how did you know about trials?
The most I know about medicine was watching House years ago, and which means I really don't know much. And I worked at an academic medical institution for some time and had the pleasure of meeting incredible doctors and medical students where I started to pick up more about medicine. And so I knew that clinical trials were a thing and that some people survive thanks to clinical trials. So it's like this mysterious thing that exists for some, but not for others. And I tried to figure out, well, why is that? And does he qualify for a clinical trial? How do we do this? And that's what I spent time doing and looking into.
But at this point, the doctors had not mentioned it, right?
They didn't mention clinical trials. They did mention you could get a second opinion if you'd like. They said if you find someone who's willing to cut this out of your dad's head, they would think very strongly that is the wrong course of action, and they would be surprised if we did find someone that would do that. And so that's what I began to do. Was I needed to now confirm their recommendations by finding second opinions.
Why did you need to confirm it?
Because I was not willing to accept that these three people know everything about this disease. I appreciate it. I think they're very smart, but I'm going to verify this myself. And I want to hear the same thing from the very best doctors that I can possibly find. We got back, and I'm trying to, it's hard, the days and the time gets muddled, but we got back and I believe what we did was we had they gave us a CD. I think they gave us a CD that day of his x-rays. Yeah, a CD, right?
Don't even.
Okay. And I'm like, do I even put this? Do I put this in my computer? Like, what does this do? Do I even have a CD thing? Like, I come from the generation that used to mix CDs all the time, but that was like 20 years ago. I don't even know what to do with this. I'm pretty sure it was the same day, actually, because I think it was an early morning appointment. Okay, so here's what happens. I'm fairly confident this is what happens. This is the next step. So I drop him and my mom off at the house. He's not She's having word finding issues. Other than that, the man's moving, walking, can make coffee for himself. He's like okay.
Yeah.
Besides this weird word finding issue. So I get home, and I think my wife was home. It was summer. Yeah, it was summer. So she was home with the kids, and I said, and I got home. I started looking at where I could get second opinion from. I immediately contacted MGH up in Boston, Mass General, found a neurosurgeon there that would do a second opinion. They said we need the CD. Now I can't email it to them. Okay. And I don't want to wait. I'm in no mood to wait. And so we live about a little over an hour outside of Boston. We're in Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. And so I said to my wife, we have to go to Boston. We're going right now. And they close at 4, and I need to get up there by 4:00 so I could put this CD in that man's hands so that I can get a second opinion for my dad. We called my in-laws to come over and watch our kids. Our children were 3 and 5 at the time. 3 and 5-year-olds can't process anything that we're talking about. So they don't know anything that's going on. And I call my in-law. My wife calls her parents, and she's like, could you get over here? And they're like, yeah, we could probably make it there in like an hour or so. Now, they don't live far. I think they were like 10 minutes away. And I was like, 1 hour is too long. We're leaving now. And I ran across the street to my neighbors, and I said, I'm so sorry. My dad has been diagnosed with brain cancer, and I'm very close with my neighbors, and they're the most wonderful neighbors. And I said, can the kids come over? Can my kids come over and just watch TV on the floor? We need to leave. We got to go to Boston right now. And they are absolutely like, yes. Oh my God, bring them over. And I think as I'm shuffling them across the street, my in-laws showed up. We took off. I learned to drive in New York, by the way. I'm a New York driver. So I'll let the listeners judge that for what it means, okay? And I get in that car, and I take off with my wife up to Boston. Nobody is stopping me. And it is about 2 something, or it is the worst possible time to be driving anywhere into Boston. And we flew up to Boston as fast as we could. I wanted to talk to the doctor. I wanted to see him, but I realized it was like 3:58 and the office was closing at 4:30, or it was whatever it was, 4:00. And we had like 5 minutes to get the CD up to the whatever floor of MGH. And so I pull up, my wife hops out. She just runs up. She says, I'll just deliver it. And she just takes off running. We've never even been to MGH before. She just takes off running. I'm hoping she finds it. She comes back to the car maybe 10 minutes later, and I think she like bumped into the admin assistant in the elevator or something who had like just closed the door. And she's like, we got to get this to Dr. So-and-so. And they were like, yeah, of course. And they turned back around, Just great. I think when people are in these positions, and a lot of people in healthcare, they understand that they're. Yeah. I can't tell you how many angels we met in all of it. So we get the CD into his hands, and we take off home. Now the rush is over. All this crazy like race rush of, okay, I've gotten what I needed to get, a picture of my dad's brain to a neurosurgeon at a top of the line institution for a second look. Not to say that the people in Rhode Island were wrong, but to confirm that the people in Rhode Island were right. Yeah. I didn't want them to necessarily be right, because they said, we can't open him up. We can't cut this out. So I was hoping maybe this guy would say, yeah, I could take this out. I also didn't realize that even when you get tumors taken out with GBM, the chances are not, they're just not, it's really it's a bad disease. Okay. It's just a bad disease. So we get a call back from him immediately. We're on the way home, and he calls us, and he reviewed the file, and reviewed everything, and he said, I agree with the recommendations from the folks in Rhode Island. I'm so sorry. I wish I could do more, but I think you're in good hands. So now I feel, okay, I got the second opinion. That was my job. I got it. They agree. That's the plan. Get a biopsy, do standard of care. This is not a non-resectable tumor.
Chris, but at this point in time, have you already Googled the outcomes?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And knowing that information didn't help. I don't think it. I don't think it helped me. Did it help me in that I knew this was incredibly dire situation and motivated me to move quicker and faster and take on the role of fierce patient advocate? Probably did. I'll say my mother never Googled it. She never once opened the binder or looked at the outcomes for this disease. Never once. She lived in the moment with him.
I can understand that. I really can. The first time around, I was like you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, need to know everything, need to cross-check everything, need to verify everything. Like,
yeah.
And honestly, right now, Chris, I don't think I could. And I think it's because of what you said. And I think you said it very well, that the information is traumatic. The information itself is traumatic, which I think is beautifully said. I had never really thought about it that way.
It's indescribable because you're processing a lot. You're processing the disease, that there's now a terminal disease inside of the person I love. But you're also processing grief. And that's why I say when this diagnosis came around, I was grieving.
Yeah.
I was scared. One of the first places I went was to church. I'm not really a church going person. I grew up Roman Catholic. So we're kind of like, from day one, we're kind of told like you've done something wrong, you've sinned, which I never really totally bought that I didn't do anything wrong. I'm a baby. I didn't do anything wrong. Well, one of the first places I went to was church, and I because I needed a place to vent. I went into my church. I found an open pew, and I dropped to my knees and I prayed and I cried. And this wonderful old woman, I mean, really old, like with a walker, old, coming down the aisle, said, "Are you okay, sweetie?" And I said, "No, I'm not okay." And she said, "Can I pray with you?" I have never prayed with anybody, Samira. Okay, I've never done that. And she came into the pew, and we just prayed together. Because you're grasping onto anything that will help you get through what you have to get through. And that's one of the things I felt like I could do. And I prayed for things that were not possible. I prayed that he would be saved. I prayed that this would go away, that he, and a friend of mine, who when these things happen, you have to call every family members, friends, and which is that's a nightmare in of itself. A friend of mine who's a Marine, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this. I don't think I mentioned this the last time we spoke. Everybody who I called and explained all this to were very kind and said very nice, sweet things to me of take care of yourself, and how's your mom? How are you doing? How's Jody, my wife? How are the kids? How's your dad? And my buddy, I call my one buddy. I'll give him a little shout out here. He doesn't like to tell people that he was a Marine, but he was a U.S. Marine, and he gave me very different advice from 99.9% of everyone else whom I spoke with. He said, "You need to be the rock for your family now. You cannot be weak. You have to man up." Like, this is like John Wayne advice, which maybe it's good at some points in life. Maybe it's not. I don't know. All I know is he gave me that advice of, this is a time where you need to show up. You can cry later. And then the other thing he said to me was, and if you pray to God, make sure that you pray for something that he can actually deliver. And, that comes different from someone who's been in combat.
Yeah.
He's been in combat. He joined up after 9/11, and he's seen some very difficult things. He's a hero to me. And here's one of my hero best friends saying, be careful and pray for what he can give you. And from that moment on, I prayed that he would give me strength. Not that he would take my dad's cancer away, which is what I really wished. But I just prayed that he could give me strength.
Chris, thank you. I really appreciate you sharing the complexity of what's going on, and for you being vulnerable and being willing to talk about the many things kind of playing out minute by minute. So thank you.
I live it every day. I live the diagnosis. I live being in that room. I can't escape it. Sometimes I'd like to, but I can't. And that's grief.
It might be more than that. I'd argue it's more than that.
Yeah. I mean,
because I live it. I live it as well, but I think it's more than that. I think it's more than that just because now I've had the pleasure of knowing you, and I believe that it's more than grief because I see the impact you drive in the world, and it's more than grief. So
thank you.
We have to do part 3 if you're open to it, of course. I think we may have part 5 on this one, to be honest, because I think you and I have made like very slow progress on the story. But
I think we keep going. We keep going. Absolutely. Because it's a story that needs to be told.
Yeah.
Not only for me, it's not for me, it's not only for my dad, but it's a story for all of us.
Yes.
That we're here, we matter, we live, we experience love, we experience grief, we experience trauma, we experience blessings. Life is so incredibly complex, and I have enjoyed having this conversation with you, going to a place that only I go to in my head. And so to go there publicly on a platform like yours, and knowing that there are people out there who are going through this too and feel alone and feel scared, they are not alone. So I'd be happy to come back and maybe dive into the next part of this story, which is becoming a caregiver. And it's the ups and downs and the highs and lows, and believe it or not, the joys, the hidden joys of caregiving for a loved one with terminal cancer, which one would think that's not possible. Well, it is in this crazy story of ours. So I'd be happy to come back and go there with you. And
Thank you,
go
Chris.
there together.
Thank you. I appreciate you tremendously. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for doing part 2 of this episode.
Thanks, Samira.
This podcast, show notes, and newsletter is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or any materials linked from this blog is at the user's own risk. The opinions of the speakers are their own and do not represent the opinions of organizations they're affiliated with, nor do they reflect the opinions of Mantacares Inc. or Mantacares' sponsors.